If people don't feel attracted or intrigued by something, then you failed in the project. So that structure had to be interesting, engaging, possibly quite challenging, something that would make you look twice.
People make assumptions about contemporary art, it's not for me, history, that's boring, and all of these sort of things this baggage that you carry with you. But actually, there's so many crossovers it's about the human condition. And so by making those connections and by introducing those other ways of experiencing and seeing, I think it's really interesting.
It's a touring space in which you can listen to and watch the work of 8 authors and poets who had taken up residency across the country from east to west, roughly following the trajectory of Hadrian's Wall. I wanted it to be a mix of poetry and prose, so I guess that was, newer and older voices was part of it. And we were very lucky with the locations, I guess, and the partnerships that we had, because they were all really supportive and all gave something different to the project, really.
To put something extraordinarily visual, which is different, in like a Roman place, that's exciting to me, I suppose. If it looked like a pastiche of a Roman Mansio or something like that, it just wouldn't do it, really. You've got to do something really extraordinary and exciting.
When you make a brief for a project like this, what you try and do is you try and encapsulate the kind of qualities you're looking for without actually saying what those qualities are going to be expressed. We chose the design by Matthew Butcher mainly because it was a very good balance between these different aspirations. It looked great. It was a really interesting way of referencing the history of the north of England without slavishly kind of going down it's got to look like a Roman ruin sort of route, So he described it as a mobile ruin, but actually the inspiration for it, for the actual shapes that they used, came from sort of early 20th century industrial ruins rather than Roman ones. The design itself wasn't a permanent experience in itself, it was a movable feast, in the way that when you take the ideas and the writing and the poetry to different people, they interpret it differently, or they see it or they hear it at Vindolanda or at Senhouse or wherever, and so in each case they resonate differently as well. So the design language allows for a bit of shifting of that in the way that the literary part of it does as well.
My brief was just to be inspired really by the wall, to write anything that I sought to write. So for me it was a case of starting with the wall and really thinking about the wall, what it meant then and what it's meant over time and what it means to me.
The physicality of the wall is really interesting. The sense that somebody put these huge stones together to form a barrier, that dug this ditch on the other side, and you drive along there now and you still see the disturbances of the earth that were made, all those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. They are still there, and they'll still be there for hundreds and hundreds of years to come.
It's that original division of Britain which became a division between England and Scotland, and it still stands. You can still see this wall, and it's quite incredible to have that proximity to that original idea that still is affecting our politics and our history today.
Through this commission, I've come to realise that the castle has become a kind of almost like a propaganda tool for war and death and oppression. It is very much them and us.
That touring structure was really about new audiences, new places, and a different way of bringing art, literature, architecture world to an audience that is engaged in a different activity.
It's very strange.
Yeah.
It's eye-catching.
It's quite radical, but I like it.
Some people would walk in and would be fascinated in the architecture, so the space itself. So they would come in and view the space. Some people would come in knowing or having read the signage that it was about the writing and the literature, so would look for the literature within the space that they could listen to. And those that had no idea would enter the space and go into the cinema room. So depending on how the person felt or what they were after, they would engage with the space different ways.
We didn't really understand what it was.
Bit intriguing, just curious more than anything.
Yeah.
Just come over and have a look.
I think some people loved it, and their love for it intrigued them and meant they wanted to come in. I think some people were initially anxious of what it was.
To have people outside talking about it and guiding you into it was important. So Morag was an important part of that project.
I had conversations with over 1,000 people this summer about this project, and what a lot of people felt was that feeling of territory.
It was very moving, and I still think it's a monstrosity, but I think that's what draws you in.
I think that the contrast between the old and the new, in some ways they fit together. Yeah, it was beautiful.
It's like modern meets ancient.
The performance art element inside is really enriched by having read the book, and I like the fact that so many of the authors had done such a clever link of past to present.
One thing that the films really did was allowed people to gain a perspective on where the writer was coming from and draw out the writer's inspirations.
There is something about doing the poem as a film, which means that the film translates the poem. And that's very exciting, because what you have is the poem enhanced by the interpretation of the camera. And I find that really interesting. And often if you overwrite, if you make a piece too dense, it can take away from film of the poem. So I think there is something quite exciting there, something where I think, okay, this can really work.
Performance poetry is meant to be seen performed. So if we just had that on audio, you would have missed the performative element of Holly's story, which I think is really, really, really important, that rhythm and that technique and that passion.
There's one bit in one of Holly McNish's poems that I just really stood out at me, the bit where she says, I'm sick of knowing in my guts that if we still not learned from ancient days that tomorrow
and forever after will likely just repeat again.
Reading the poem, My Neighbour, and reading about Syria and the situation we're in now in Syria and people coming in, and reading about those people being responsible for what we think is iconically British, Hadrian's Wall, I thought it was quite amazing actually.
We knew when we talked about the piece, we said that it was an international group of people who are working with the Romans, and so when Jules and I first talked about it, that was key to us, that we were saying, look, you know, these people were here 2,000 years before. So I think it resonated a lot and probably influenced the author's writing as well.
When I think of Hadrian's Wall, I can't help but think of the wall of partition, as it were, and the walls that separate nations. And then that led me to think about much more contemporary walls. What are our contemporary walls? Well, we have literal boundaries, but also nations have subtler boundaries.
I just think the projects like this are great for provoking people's thoughts and maybe thinking a bit more about everything. And I think obviously that's what writing does, isn't it? Writing sort of takes us into another environment, another world from where we are.
The Mansio was a really peaceful place. It was a place to rest and sit and think and invite conversation.
I hadn't really considered that Hadrian's Wall is very much a lived history. You know, we live in that history, and it really kind of changed my conception of living in that history as opposed to thinking of it as a sort of artefact.
Anything that refreshes the view and gives us a new perspective on this important part of where we are in Northumberland is very welcome.
I never knew what a Mansio was. Very interesting. Nice afternoon to spend a bit of time and learn a bit more about other people's thoughts.
It is a way of transferring that oral tradition, you know, which is something that is that goes beyond the written word, even in terms of history, you know. So it's almost bringing that tradition back to life as well as the written word, and that's fantastic because you can see all around here it's getting people talking, you know, and the way that the poems have been presented in a very contemporary sense makes it so much more accessible, perhaps, to a much broader audience, which is really fantastic.
The people who came to see it are the legacy because they're the ones who've had that experience, and they will go on to share that experience with other people. They're the people who will take it on and hopefully explore those writers further, maybe be inspired to write their own work by the world around them.